I'm engaged, Jimin. I wanted you to hear it from me first. The words didn't echo, they shattered, splintering through the quiet cafe like glass hitting marble, sharp and irreversible. Jimin didn't move at first. The world around him slowed into fragments. The soft hiss of the espresso machine, the faint tapping of rain against the window, the distant laughter of strangers who had no idea that something irreversible had just happened. Jungkook stood across from him, taller than Jimin remembered, broader somehow, dressed in a way that spoke of a life that had moved forward without him. And beside him, too close, too real, stood a woman with a gentle expression and a ring that glinted under the dim cafe light. Jimin's fingers tightened around his cup, the ceramic warm but suddenly unbearable against his skin. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times over the years, but never like this. Never with someone else standing in the space that had always belonged to him. You said you'd come back," Jimin whispered, his voice barely holding together like thread fraying at the edges. Jungkook's eyes flickered guilt, hesitation, something deeper, but it was gone almost instantly, buried beneath a practiced calm. "I did come back. Not for me." The words hung unspoken, suffocating. Jimin had waited, not just days or months, but years. Years marked by seasons that blurred together, by nights spent staring at his phone, rereading old messages that had long since lost their warmth. He had memorized Jungkook's last text like it was scripture. "Wait for me," and he had. Through birthdays that felt incomplete, through empty spaces at dinner tables, through songs that reminded him too much of what used to be. He had built his life around a promise, fragile and invisible, yet stronger than anything else he believed in. But promises, he realized now, could rot over time. The woman beside Jungkook shifted slightly, her hand brushing against his arm. It was a small gesture, almost unconscious, but it struck Jimin harder than the words had. "Ha-yoon," she said softly, her voice careful, as if she understood she was stepping into something sacred and broken at the same time. Jimin nodded automatically, though he barely heard her. His gaze was locked on Jungkook, searching desperately for something familiar. The boy who used to laugh too loudly, who couldn't hide his emotions even if he tried, who once held Jimin's hand like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. But the man standing in front of him felt like a stranger wearing Jungkook's face. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jimin asked, his voice steadier now, though it trembled beneath the surface. "All this time, not even once." Jungkook exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, a habit Jimin knew too well. It used to mean he was nervous. Now it just felt like a distant echo of something that no longer belonged to him. "I thought it would be easier," Jungkook said. "Who?" Jimin shot back, the words sharper than he intended. "Because it wasn't for me," settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Even the rain seemed to quiet, as if the world itself was listening. Jimin looked down at the table, at the faint ring of water left by his cup. He traced it absently, his thoughts unraveling in every direction at once. Anger, sadness, disbelief, they collided inside him, each one demanding to be felt, to be acknowledged. But beneath it all there was something else, fear, because if Jungkook had truly moved on, then what had all those years meant? "I waited for you," Jimin said finally, the words softer now, stripped of accusation and heavy with truth. "I didn't move on, I didn't try to forget." Jungkook's expression faltered just for a second. It was enough. "I know," he said quietly, that hurt more than anything. Because it meant Jungkook had known and still chose this. Jimin let out a shaky breath, leaning back in his chair. The cafe felt smaller now, the walls closing in, the air too thick to breathe. "You always do this," Jimin murmured, almost to himself. Jungkook frowned slightly. "Do what?" "You decide everything on your own. You leave, you come back, you—" Jimin's voice broke, and he swallowed hard, forcing himself to continue. "You change our story without even asking me if I still wanted to be part of it." The words lingered, raw and unfiltered. Ha-yoon looked between them, her expression shifting, understanding dawning, mixed with something like sadness. She wasn't oblivious. She could see it now, the invisible thread that still connected them, frayed but not completely broken. "Jungkook," she said gently, "maybe we should." "It's okay," Jimin interrupted, shaking his head. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. His legs felt unsteady, but he forced himself to stand tall. Because he refused to fall apart in front of them. "I get it now," he continued, managing a small, brittle smile. "Life moves on, people move on." His eyes betrayed him, they always had. Jungkook took a step forward instinctively as if he wanted to close the distance between them. Jimin, don't, Jimin said quickly, raising a hand, not in anger but in defense. If you come any closer, I might believe you again. That stopped Jungkook. And in that moment, everything they had ever been, every laugh, every touch, every whispered promise, hung between them like a ghost. Jimin grabbed his coat, his movements mechanical. He could feel it now, the weight of reality settling in, pressing against his chest until it was almost unbearable. He had spent years waiting for a version of Jungkook that no longer existed. And maybe he had changed too. At the door, Jimin paused, just for a second, just long enough to look back. Jungkook was still standing there, frozen, caught between the past and the present. Ha-yoon stood beside him, her hand hovering near his, uncertain. It was a complete picture, a future that didn't include him. Jimin opened the door, the cold, rain-laced air rushing in to meet him. It hit his face, sharp and real, grounding him in a way nothing else had. For the first time in years, he stopped waiting. And as he stepped out into the rain, leaving behind everything he had held onto for so long, something inside him finally broke, quietly, completely, and without anyone else noticing. But somewhere deep within that quiet devastation, something else began to stir, not hope, not yet, but the faint, fragile beginning of letting go. And maybe, just maybe, that was where his story truly began. The rain didn't stop. It followed Jimin down the narrow street, threading itself into his hair, clinging to his coat, soaking through the thin fabric like it wanted to reach his bones. He didn't run from it. He didn't even try to shield himself. Each cold drop felt like a reminder that this ache, this emptiness was real. Behind him, the cafe door chimed once. Jimin didn't turn around. His steps were slow at first, uncertain, like he was still expecting someone to call his name. To stop him, to fix what had just shattered so easily. But no one did. The city stretched out before him in blurred lights and muted colors, everything distorted through the thin veil of rain and the heavier one clouding his vision. He passed by familiar places without recognizing them, corners where he and Jungkook used to stand too close, streets where laughter once echoed between them. Now it all felt distant, like memories belonging to someone else. His phone buzzed, once, twice. Jimin ignored it, shoving his hands deeper into his coat pockets as if he could hide from everything pressing in on him. But the vibration didn't stop. It insisted, relentless. With a quiet exhale, he pulled it out, Jungkook. The name alone was enough to make his chest tighten again. Jimin stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the notification. For a moment, just a moment, he almost answered. Almost let himself fall back into that familiar pull, that dangerous comfort. But then he remembered the ring, the way it caught the light so effortlessly, like it belonged there. Like Jimin never had, he turned the phone off. The silence that followed was louder than anything else. Jungkook stood in the middle of the cafe long after Jimin had disappeared. The world slowly resumed around him, the hum of machines, the murmur of conversations, but it all sounded wrong. Too distant, too normal, as if nothing had just unraveled. You should go after him. Ha-yoon's voice was soft but firm enough to cut through the fog in his mind. Jungkook didn't move. I can't, he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. Ha-yoon studied him for a moment, her gaze searching, understanding more than he had ever told her. Or you won't. That question lingered, heavier than any accusation. Jungkook clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He had imagined this meeting too, countless times during the years he was away. But in every version he had control. He knew what to say, how to explain. He hadn't expected Jimin to look at him like that, like he was both everything and nothing. I hurt him, Jungkook admitted quietly. Ha-yoon nodded. Yes, was no denial, no softening. And you knew you would, she added. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. He had known. From the moment he stepped back into the city, from the moment he saw Jimin's name appear on his screen again after years of silence, he had known this wouldn't end without breaking something. He just hadn't realized it would break him. Didn't remember how he got home. One moment he was walking, the next he was standing in front of his apartment door, keys trembling in his hand. The hallway was quiet, the faint buzz of a flickering light overhead the only sound accompanying him. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. Darkness greeted him. For a second he just stood there, letting it swallow him whole. It was easier this way, without light, without clarity, just shadows and silence. He dropped his coat on the floor, not bothering to hang it up, and walked further in. The apartment was exactly as he had left it that morning, neat, untouched, painfully still. A life paused. Jimin sank onto the couch, his body finally giving in to the weight it had been carrying all day. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands covering his face. And then nothing, no tears, no sobs, just a hollow emptiness that stretched endlessly inside him. "I waited," he whispered into the silence, as if the walls could hear him, as if they could answer. "I really waited." His voice cracked on the last word, because waiting had been his way of loving, patient, quiet, unwavering. But what was love? If it was only held by one person? Jimin lowered his hand slowly, his gaze drifting to the small shelf across the room, photographs, fragments of a past he had refused to let go of. There was one in particular, tucked slightly behind the others, like it was both hidden and protected. Jimin stood up, drawn to it without thinking. His fingers hesitated before pulling it free. It was simple. Just the two of them. Jungkook was laughing, his head thrown back slightly, eyes bright and unguarded. Jimin stood beside him, smiling softly, his gaze fixed not on the camera, but on Jungkook, like he always had been. Jimin's grip tightened on the photo. "You told me not to follow you," he murmured, his voice trembling now, emotions finally cracking through the surface. "You said if I trusted you, I would stay." He had, God, he had, because loving Jungkook had always felt like trusting the impossible. A shaky breath left his lips. Was I just convenient to leave behind? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Jimin pressed the photo against his chest, his eyes finally closing as the first tear slipped free. Then another, and another, until the silence of the apartment was filled with quiet, broken sobs. Across the city, Jungkook stood on his balcony, the rain still falling around him. He hadn't gone home. He hadn't been able to. The engagement ring on his finger felt heavier than ever, like it didn't quite belong anymore. Like it was a promise made in a different life. His phone was still in his hand, the screen dark now. Jimin hadn't answered. Of course he hadn't. Jungkook leaned against the railing, his head tilting back as he closed his eyes. The rain hit his face, cold and relentless, but he didn't move. Memories surfaced, uninvited. Jimin's laugh, Jimin's voice, Jimin's hand slipping into his like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'll wait," Jimin had said back then, his eyes steady, certain. "Even if it takes forever." Jungkook had believed him, he just hadn't believed in himself. A bitter smile tugged at his lips. "You shouldn't have," he whispered into the storm, "because some promises weren't meant to be kept, and some people were never meant to be left behind." Jungkook opened his eyes, staring out at the city that suddenly felt too small for everything he was carrying. Somewhere out there, Jimin was hurting because of him. And for the first time in years, Jungkook didn't know how to fix it. He didn't even know if he was allowed to try.
Morning arrived without warmth. Jimin woke on the couch with a stiffness in his neck and a dull ache behind his eyes, the kind that didn't come from lack of sleep but from something heavier, something that had settled into him overnight and refused to leave. The rain had stopped, but its presence lingered in the damp air seeping through the slightly open window, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt and something faintly metallic. For a moment, he didn't move. He stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible cracks that weren't really there, letting the silence stretch around him again. It felt different this time, not empty, but quiet in a way that forced him to hear everything he had been trying to ignore. The photo was still in his hand. He hadn't let go of it. Jimin slowly sat up, his fingers tightening slightly around the edges before he exhaled and placed it face down on the table. He couldn't look at it again. Not yet. Maybe not ever. His phone lay on the floor where he must have dropped it sometime during the night. When he picked it up, the screen lit up with missed calls. Jungkook 3 calls, 2 messages. Jimin didn't open them. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, each step deliberate, as if he were relearning how to exist in a world that no longer revolved around waiting. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands steady now, almost unnaturally so, this calm. It didn't feel like healing. It felt like distance. And maybe that was the first step. Jungkook hadn't slept. The sky had turned from black to gray to pale morning blue while he remained on that balcony, unmoving, the city slowly waking beneath him. The rain had washed everything clean, but it hadn't touched what was tangled inside him. His phone was still silent. No reply. He told himself he expected that. He told himself it was better this way, but expectation didn't soften the weight pressing against his chest. Inside, Hyun moved quietly, the soft sound of dishes clinking against each other reaching him through the open door. She hadn't asked him anything else after last night. Hadn't pushed. That was who she was, gentle, understanding, safe. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. Safe wasn't supposed to feel like this. "I'm going out," he said when he stepped back inside. Hyun turned to look at him, her expression unreadable but calm. To see him, Jungkook hesitated. "I don't know." They both knew. Jimin stepped outside for the first time since everything had fallen apart. The world looked exactly the same. People rushed past him, conversations blending into meaningless noise, cars passing by in steady rhythm. Life had continued, indifferent to what had changed inside him. It was strange, how something so devastating could feel so invisible. He walked without a destination at first, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, his gaze unfocused. But his feet moved on their own, guided by something deeper than thought, familiar streets, familiar turns, until he realized where he was, the park. Jimin stopped at the entrance, his breath catching slightly as memories surfaced uninvited. This place of all places, he almost turned around, but something kept him there. Slowly he stepped inside. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh grass, the trees still dripping faint remnants of last night's rain. The bench was still there, their bench. Jimin let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Of course it is," he muttered. Some things didn't change. That didn't mean they meant the same anymore. He walked toward it anyway, each step heavier than the last, until he finally sat down. The wood was cold beneath him, grounding in a way that hurt. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the ground. "You always came here when you were thinking too much." The voice came from behind him. Jimin froze. Slowly he closed his eyes, as if doing so might erase the reality of it. But it didn't, of course it. He let out a slow breath before turning his head. Jungkook stood a few steps away, no rain, no cafe, no distance filled with strangers, just him up close, real. Jimin studied him in silence for a moment, taking in the details he hadn't allowed himself to see last night. The slight shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands hung at his sides, uncertain. He looked tired. Good, a small, bitter part of Jimin thought. "You shouldn't be here," Jimin said finally, his voice calm, almost too calm. Jungkook didn't move closer. "I know. Then why are you?" A pause because you didn't answer. Let out a quiet breath, looking away again. "That's usually a sign." "I needed to see you," Jungkook said, his voice lower now, more careful. "Not like yesterday, not like that." Jimin's jaw tightened slightly. "Yesterday was real," he replied. "This doesn't change anything." "I know," Jungkook said again, but this time it sounded different, heavier. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. Jungkook took a step forward. Jimin noticed immediately. "Stop," he said, sharper this time. Jungkook froze. The distance between them remained safe, or maybe just necessary. "You don't get to do that anymore," Jimin continued, his voice steady but laced with something fragile beneath. "You don't get to show up and act like we're still us." Jungkook swallowed, his gaze dropping briefly before meeting Jimin again. "I'm not pretending." "Then what are you doing?" Jimin asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it, because he genuinely didn't understand. Jungkook hesitated. For the first time he looked unsure, not guarded, not controlled, but lost. "I don't know," he admitted. That answer should have frustrated Jimin. Instead it hurt, because it sounded honest. "I thought I did," Jungkook continued quietly. "I thought I knew what I was doing when I left, when I moved on." Let out a small, bitter laugh. "You seem pretty sure of it." His eyes flicked briefly to Jungkook's hand. The ring was still there, Jungkook noticed. Of course he did, slowly, almost unconsciously, his fingers curled slightly, as if he wanted to hide it, but didn't. "I didn't come here to hurt you again," he said. "Then you shouldn't have come at all." The words were immediate, instinctive. But the moment they left his mouth, something shifted. Jungkook flinched. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Jimin saw it, and for a second, just a second, he hated that it still affected him. "I deserved that," Jungkook said quietly. Jimin looked away again, his chest tightening. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had imagined anger, closure, distance. Not this, not the way everything still felt, unfinished. "Why did you really come back?" Jimin asked suddenly, his voice softer now, but no less intense. "Not yesterday, not just now. Why here? Why this city?" Jungkook was silent for a long moment, long enough that Jimin almost thought he wouldn't answer. But then, "Because of you." Jimin's breath caught. He turned his head slowly, searching Jungkook's expression for any sign that this was some kind of cruel mistake. But there was none, just quiet, unwavering truth. "That doesn't make sense," Jimin said, almost to himself. "I know, then explain it." Jungkook exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair again. "I left because I thought if I stayed I'd ruin everything," he said. "I thought loving you meant letting you go." Jimin frowned slightly, confusion cutting through his guarded expression. That's not love. I know that now, Jungkook replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Something in Jimin's chest twisted painfully, because that sounded like regret. And her? Jimin asked, nodding slightly toward Jungkook's hand. Where does she fit into that? Jungkook's gaze faltered. For the first time there was no immediate answer, and that scared Jimin more than anything else, because silence meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant this wasn't over, not even close. Jimin stood up abruptly, needing space, needing air, needing anything that wasn't this overwhelming tangle of emotions pulling him in opposite directions. I can't do this, he said, more to himself than to Jungkook. Jungkook took a step forward again without thinking this time. Jimin, I said stop. This time his voice broke, and that was enough. Jungkook stopped immediately. Jimin turned away, his hands clenched at his sides, his breathing uneven now. He had spent years waiting for Jungkook to come back, and now that he was here, everything felt more complicated than ever. I don't hate you, Jimin said suddenly, his voice quiet but clear. Jungkook blinked, surprised. I thought I would, Jimin continued. After yesterday I thought it would be easier if I did. Let out a shaky breath, but I don't. That truth hung heavily between them. Jungkook didn't move, didn't speak, because he knew what came next would matter. Jimin slowly turned his head, just enough to look at him from the corner of his eye. That doesn't mean I can still love you the same way. That was the first real ending they had reached, even if neither of them knew what came after. Jungkook didn't answer right away. The space between them seemed to expand, stretching thin and fragile, as if one wrong word could tear it completely apart. Jimin could hear the faint rustle of leaves above them, the distant laughter of children somewhere deeper in the park, but everything felt muted, like the world had stepped back to give them room to break. Not asking you to, Jungkook said finally, his voice low, careful. Jimin let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Good, because if Jungkook had asked, he didn't know what he would have done. Then what do you want? Jimin asked, turning to face him fully now. There was no anger in his expression anymore, just exhaustion. You're here. You said what you needed to say, so what is this? Jungkook looked at him like he was searching for something, an opening, a possibility, something that hadn't completely disappeared. I don't know how to just walk away from you, he admitted. Jimin's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. That honesty, it wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud, but it hit deeper than anything else Jungkook had said so far. You already did, Jimin replied quietly. Jungkook flinched again, but this time he didn't look away. I thought I could live with it, he said. I thought if I built something stable, something certain, it would be enough. Is it? Jimin asked. Jungkook hesitated. That was answer enough. Jimin gave a small nod, his gaze dropping to the ground between them. The dirt path was still damp from the rain, darkened in uneven patches, like pieces of something that hadn't fully settled yet. That's not fair, Jimin murmured. Jungkook frowned slightly. What isn't? You coming back here saying things like that? Jimin said, his voice tightening just a little. You don't get to be unsure now, not after everything. Not trying to confuse you, Jungkook said quickly. But you are, Jimin cut in. Whether you mean to or not. Followed. Jungkook's shoulders dropped slightly, like the weight of that truth had finally landed where it belonged. He paused, struggling to find the right words. I needed to see if there was still something here. Jimin's chest tightened. There is, he said before he could stop himself. Jungkook's eyes lifted instantly. Hope, dangerous and immediate, flashed across his face. Jimin saw it and it scared him. But it's not the same, Jimin added quickly, his voice steadier now, more controlled. It can't be. Hope didn't disappear entirely, but it shifted, softened into something quieter, more uncertain. Jungkook asked, not challenging, just asking. Jimin stared at him for a long moment, as if the answer should have been obvious. Because you didn't just leave, he said. You built a life without me. The words landed heavily. Jungkook swallowed. Now you're asking if there's still something left here, Jimin continued. Do you even hear yourself? Jungkook didn't respond, because he did hear it, and it sounded just as impossible as Jimin felt. Jimin ran a hand through his hair, turning away slightly as frustration and something softer tangled inside him again. You were my everything, he admitted, the words slipping out quieter than intended. Not in a dramatic way, just in the small ways, the everyday ones. Jungkook's expression changed at that, something deeper, more vulnerable surfacing. I know, he said. Jimin shook his head. No, I don't think you do. He turned back, his gaze sharper now, more focused. Because if you did, you wouldn't be standing here wearing that, he said, his eyes flicking once more to the ring. This time Jungkook didn't try to ignore it. Slowly he looked down at his hand. The metal caught the light again, but it didn't shine the same way it had yesterday. It looked heavier. I didn't plan for this, Jungkook said. Jimin let out a quiet, almost disbelieving breath. You plan to marry someone else? I plan to move on, Jungkook corrected, though his voice lacked conviction. Did you? Jimin asked. Jungkook didn't answer. Again, Jimin's chest tightened, something dangerously close to anger sparking beneath his ribs. Then don't stand here and act like you're caught in the middle of something you didn't create, he said. You made a choice. I know that, Jungkook replied, his voice firmer now. I'm not denying it. Then live with it. The words came out sharper than Jimin intended, but he didn't take them back. Jungkook went still. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, pain, maybe, or realization, but it settled quickly into something quieter. I am, he said. Jimin studied him, searching for any sign of defensiveness, any hint that this was turning into something else. But Jungkook didn't argue, didn't push. He just stood there, accepting it. And somehow that made it harder, because Jimin had expected resistance. He didn't know what to do with surrender. I didn't come here to change anything overnight, Jungkook added after a moment. I just didn't want to pretend you didn't exist. Jimin's expression softened slightly despite himself. You were doing a pretty good job of that, he said quietly. Jungkook nodded once. Yeah, no excuses, no justifications, just that. The honesty lingered between them, uncomfortable but real. Jimin looked away again, his thoughts spinning faster than he could keep up with. Everything felt too close, too immediate. The past and present overlapping in ways that made it hard to breathe. I need time, he said finally. Jungkook nodded almost instantly. Okay, Jimin blinked, a little surprised by how quickly the answer came. Arguments? He asked, a hint of something like disbelief in his tone. Jungkook shook his head. You waited years for me. I think I can handle waiting a little now. The words were simple, but they landed somewhere deep. Jimin's throat tightened slightly, but he didn't let it show. It's not the same, he said. I know, Jungkook replied, and again there was no attempt to argue, just acceptance. Jimin let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. Come looking for me, he said after a moment. Jungkook's expression flickered, but he nodded. Okay, don't call. Pause, a longer one this time, but eventually, okay. Jimin held his gaze for a second longer, as if making sure he understood, as if testing whether Jungkook would break that promise too. But Jungkook didn't look away, didn't hesitate again, so Jimin turned. And this time when he walked away, his steps were steadier, not because it didn't hurt, but because for the first time he wasn't walking towards something that might disappear again. He was walking away from it. Jungkook didn't follow. He stayed exactly where he was, watching until Jimin disappeared beyond the trees, until there was nothing left to hold on to but the echo of his presence. The park felt emptier now, quieter. Jungkook looked down at his hand again, at the ring that suddenly felt like it didn't belong in the same world as everything that had just happened. Slowly, he slid it off. He didn't throw it away. He just held it in his palm, staring at it like it might give him answers it couldn't. I'm already too late, he murmured to himself. The wind stirred gently through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain once more. And for the first time, Jungkook allowed himself to admit something he had been avoiding since the moment he came back. Moving on had never really meant forgetting. It had just meant delaying the moment he would have to face what he left behind. And now that moment had arrived, quiet, unavoidable, and far more complicated than he had ever imagined.